Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I saw something today that blew my mind. Completely blew my mind. On Twitter, someone posted a Politicon event, and it was a representative, vice chair of civil engagement. And he sat down, and I said, okay, I'm gonna give him a fair listen. Let's see what he got to say. He's from the DNC. What do you have to say for yourself, DNC? What are you going to say? What are you going to tell me? Tell me something interesting. Tell me something that makes me not like your guts, or more like your guts, if that's the word I'm looking for. Tell me something that can entice me. Tell me something. Yes, I'm cynical. Yes, I'm skeptical, but tell me something. And what comes out of his mouth, I assumed I was going to dislike it. I assumed I was going to pick it apart. I assumed that man was going to lie to me. He told the truth. He told the truth. It's like they plucked every card out the deck, and the last one was bitter, uncomfortable, just gross, painful truth. This was fascinating to me because I didn't know how to respond to this. I was disarmed. Like, it's one of those things where you're waiting for the guy to make an argument. And he doesn't make an argument. He just says, look, we went around the country. And I'm going to show it because it blew my mind. He was candid, as candid could be. And explained in matter-of-fact detail something I've been saying all along, and proving that I was right. My model of politics was right. Yes, I'm spiking the football a little bit. Because it's one thing for me to be out here and say, that has to be the reason they're doing that. The way those incentives are aligned, they're doing this stuff because they're paid to do this stuff. They're leaning a particular way. Certainly, they can see Sanders as the most popular senator. Certainly, they have brains in their skulls. And know that if this guy is that popular, if they wanted to get elected, if they were doing something similar to that particular guy, it'd be easier to get elected. They wouldn't lose so much. You spent $21 million to get somebody to act like a Republican, Ossoff, and he still lost. None of the unity shit. None of the we're all in this together and buck up, and none of that. Just bitter, honest, candid truth. Let's listen to the guy. It blew me away. It literally blew me away. I'm going to say this one part, and I'm just going to let him do the rest. But he makes this point of saying, we went around the world, we went around the United States. And what we realized was that the people felt disconnected from us. That the things that they wanted, healthcare, public education, or free public education, meaning college, none of these interventionist foreign wars, getting money out of politics, all the things that they wanted adversely affected their donors. And that it will be impossible to take on a mission to do those particular things because they would lose funding from their donors. Meaning, look, our donors weren't going to go for it. Because our donors weren't going to go for it, then we couldn't go for it. Yes, we would have wished Obamacare could be stronger, but their donors would not have gone for it to be stronger. That's amazing. I mean, that's an amazing admission. You've essentially said that the people who were paying you were calling the shots in regards to policy. It had nothing to do with what was best for the American people. It had nothing to do even with your ideology. Pay for play. I'm giving you money. You're leaning my way. No, you're not going to say it's a bribe. You're going to say it's a campaign donation. But that guy, being honest, admitted, yeah, we're being bribed. We're getting back to our roots as the Democratic Party. We were being bribed. And we realized that when you lose to a guy that has a 40% approval rating, it's time to change. Let's listen to him, because this is fucking amazing.
Know that the better deal was announced earlier last week, though there are some elements of the better deal that haven't been fully.
By the way, the better deal thing, this is what Chuck Schumer came up with, saying, we have a better deal, we have a better deal. All right? He's going to explain what that means, because nobody really knew what that meant. He's explaining in detail what that means.
Understood. So luckily we have a person from the DNC here today, Frank Spencer. He's the Deputy Vice President of Civic Engagement, to discuss some of the finer points. So Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thanks for coming. Thanks to for hosting us. As you said, as Jennifer said, lots of people did miss a few of the finer points of the better deal. It is a profound turning point in the history of our party and the history of our nation. It takes our party right back to its progressive roots. And this week we're rolling out a series of sort of town halls like this to communicate and get feedback on the finer points that people might have missed, as well as to talk about new directions and solicit your ideas. So please stay tuned. Use the hashtag. This conversation is global, like everything.
Yes, you can follow along on Twitter at #DNCTakeback, and if you have questions or comments, please add them there, and we'll be addressing those at the end of the conversation, and we also take questions from the audience.
Yep. And I wanted to begin by talking a little bit about how we got there. This didn't come out of nothing. As Senator Schumer said last week, when you lose to somebody who has 40% popularity, you've got to take a good strong look in the mirror and ask yourself what happened. And I want to add that even more importantly than that, you want to ask what you can do differently next time so as to win. And so that is what we've done. Back in December, we started a series of town halls and focus groups to determine what voters across the political spectrum needed and wanted, and what we had failed to provide. And we did that in order to understand how we could address those concerns in the future and win elections as we once did. What we found in our research mirrored the national polls, poll after poll after poll. It also mirrored what was happening in state and local elections across the country again and again. We found that a solid majority of Americans wanted universal government-sponsored health care, and even almost half of all Republicans did. A majority wanted stronger unions, again, across the political spectrum, especially workers, but everyone. 2/3 of Americans wanted tuition-free college. Non-interventionism was very popular. As we know, a number of Trump voters voted that way because of his promises to keep us out of conflicts. Almost everyone in our survey and in the polls thinks that Wall Street has way too much influence, and many people said they would get rid of corporate lobbying altogether. Once we had understood these concerns that we had failed to address, we began to look at how we could do so in the future. And that's when we realized we couldn't. Our hands were tied, in large part because of our donors. Medicare for All would be a disaster for the insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies who are very important donors to our party. They loved Obamacare, which however did not lower costs, and Medicare for All, which would, these companies did not like quite as much. Strong unions would be horrible for many of our friends in the management community. The schools that almost all of us hail from might not take so well to the idea of tuition-free colleges, which would bite into some of their profits. It would be pretty hard for military contractors to give up the $400 billion that flows their way, in part stimulated by foreign interventions. And as for preventing corporations from lobbying in government or providing public financing of elections, it's hard to imagine that any of our donors would like that very much. If we were going to have a better deal, if we were going to adopt the positions that could win future elections for our party, we had to begin by severing our donor relationships, which would also pave the way for a more collective kind of support, which was proven to be entirely possible in this last election on both sides of the fight. So after passing a resolution first proposed by Christine Pelosi in February to prevent corporate donations to the DNC from happening, we adopted a series of similar measures that freed us to champion the most people-friendly, the most vote-getting policies. Medicare for all, strong unions, tuition-free college, non-interventionism, the reduction of corporate influence, the abolition of private prisons, that one was also quite popular across the aisle, and also getting even more firmly behind renewable energy. It turns out that 3/4 of Trump supporters are in favor of renewable energy, in part perhaps because of the large number of jobs it creates. But let me talk about jobs for a minute. Studies suggest that within the next 20 years, almost half of all jobs in the United States could be lost to automation. We don't know whether this will happen, but it's possible. And regardless of whether this does happen, a universal basic income will help all people have a good future, regardless of their position within the wolf-eat-dog hierarchy that is increasingly taking shape in our country. We cannot let corporations or corporate politicians decide how all of this works out. In the past, again and again, the people behind the party of the people stood up against corporations and their politicians to achieve most of the things we call civilized today. Social security, the 8-hour workday, the weekend, an end to child labor, and so on and so forth. It's time once again for people to decide how the world ought to be, and to stop leaving decisions in the hands of the children who happen to have the most toys. Starting today, the Democratic Party is going to serve the people, once again, by fighting for what people need and want, and that therefore win elections. And to begin doing that, we are going to start by championing the reduction of corporate influence across the country over our democracy. We're going to aim to outlaw corporate lobbying in government, and we're going to fight for the public financing of elections. That's what the DNC Take Back is all about, because better just isn't good enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That is a big deal. I'm curious, because I do think that many will perceive these changes as radical. How do you address that? I mean, though you are going back to the party roots, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, they're not radical, they're actually very traditional. Our party had very similar platforms that appealed to a large number of people. The emphasis was on appealing to people, and that's how we held on to every single presidency but one for 35 years after the Great Depression. We are simply returning to the roots where we emphasize who we are actually beholden to, the people. We're called the party of the people, and we remain that way. We've also seen this not only, I mean, I'm talking about the distant past. For some it seems very distant, especially the young voters among us, among you. But we've seen in elections this year that these sorts of policies work, and they are very traditional. They don't come out of nowhere. We've seen in places like Georgia, Missouri, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Florida, we've seen very progressive platforms winning. In Jackson, Mississippi, Mayor Lumumba won 93% of the vote, 93 in Mississippi, promising to make Jackson the most progressive city on the planet. Not far from where I'm from, in Long Island, a school teacher named Christine Pellegrino won in an area that had gone to Trump by 23%, and she campaigned by a margin of 23%, and she campaigned on a very progressive platform. So we know that this works. And these sorts of elections were, of course, a big contrast to the special elections, which mostly featured much more centrist established candidates with the sorts of policies that we have become used to. And so we've seen the writing on the wall. What wins is, at this point, very clear.
You mentioned universal basic income, and I'm curious, and I'm sure many others are, what is that essentially, and is it feasible?
Well, we know it's feasible. A great number of countries, almost pretty much all developed countries in the world, have much more generous social programs than we do. Some of them have very, very generous social programs compared to what we have, and they do fine. So we know it's feasible. They don't have trillion-dollar military budgets, of course, or whatever proportion of their GDP that would be. But do we really need a trillion-dollar military budget? Are we that paranoid? And why are we that paranoid? You know, these are the kinds of questions. How did this come about that we have to have a trillion-dollar military budget?
Is it essentially like a boondoggle for the Halliburtons of the world, or is it really protecting us as a nation?
Yeah, it's in part a boondoggle for the Halliburtons of the world, and it's also self-perpetuating. You know, the sorts of policies that we've had, you know, getting back to non-interventionism, which is immensely popular again across the political spectrum, those sorts of policies have at times created power vacuums across the country that have engendered the ISISes of the world, the Al-Qaedas of the world, and have, which still pose effectively no threat whatsoever to us, but the specter of these things does generate more paranoia, which excuses the need for further investments. We can do without a trillion-dollar military budget if that's what we need to do, at least part of it.
I want to go back to universal health care, which you mentioned, and this past week's failure of the Republican take on repealing the Affordable Care Act. And so I'm curious how you see the Democrats reaching across the aisle and providing solutions.
Well, one thing we might reach across the aisle with would be to, you know, admit that Obamacare was not the optimal solution. It was much, much better than nothing, than what we had before, and much better than what has been proposed, if you call it proposing. But it wasn't optimal. It was an accord with the insurance companies. It was immensely popular with the insurance and pharmaceutical companies. It did nothing to reduce costs to the government. We know what would reduce costs. We've long known what would reduce costs. But Medicare for All would not please our largest donors. And this is why it's been so important for us. We have really looked at where these policies come from, why we have not done the logical vote-getting, election-winning things. And we've seen very clearly the source is often in who we are beholden to. And those were choices we made in the 1970s. We made the choice deliberately to become, to nourish our party with donations of a few large donors rather than a great many small ones, and to reach out to these immense interests. And frankly, it's in a sense, it's corrupted us. It's you know, just as you know, I mean, power corrupts and money corrupts, and we have ended up with policies that are limited by the desires of those who keep us going. And Obamacare is a prime example. So we do have a solution. We've known it. It's not, in fact, we've known it because the rest of the world has it. And that's, in our country, that would be Medicare, the Medicare system that expanded to cover everyone. It's not a, it is a no-brainer.
Great. I want to open it up to all of you.
I would recommend anyone watch that. It is amazing. That is amazing. I sat there and I watched it and I thought to myself, oh my God, he's telling me the truth. He's saying a true thing. Now, some of this is appeasing to my ego because I've said this for the past 6 months. What he just said is what I come on here and rattle and shake about often. And it always used to bug me that they would never just earnestly and honestly tell me the truth. Tell me the truth. Certainly you understand we're paying attention to what the fuck is going on. Be honest. Tell me the truth. When all the cards were expired, he went so far as to say, yeah, the reason you got that shitty Obamacare was because we're corrupt. The health insurance companies wouldn't have went for it if we tried to do Medicare for all. They didn't like it, so we didn't do it. That's an amazing statement. Like, that is an amazing statement. He's admitting to corruption. Yes, we were corrupt. We were corrupt. We were philosophically supposed to be something else, and we were corrupt. We started to take more and more cash, and we started to move further and further to the right. That's yeah, man. That's amazing. That's amazing. That put it this way, of all the things I expected to come out of his mouth, it wasn't that. The interesting thing here is the meta-narrative. And there is a meta-narrative going on. So when FDR pulled this off, it was told that FDR went to the plutocrats. And he made a point to the plutocrats that, look, we need to give some of this money back, otherwise there will be hell to pay. You're going to lose it all. You're going to lose it all. There are people further to the left of me who are coming behind me, and they are not going to stop at taking a little bit. Some went with him, some went against him. The ones that went against him bitched and moaned and railed and everything else, but for the most part, he had enough support to push through all of his plans, the New Deal. Is this the New Deal? Is that what this is? Like, is that what the game is? Or is that what they're scheming for? Is that what they're trying to turn or pivot themselves to? This idea of, all right, I know the unity thing is bullshit. I know 50 million people has left the party. Yes, that's true. We were just saying that. We were corrupt. We were extraordinarily corrupt. We took a lot of money and we did things. We know you didn't like those things, but we did those things because our donors wanted us to do those things. As a politician, we have to come out here and sell them, whatever the donors want. In this case, we couldn't get elected anymore. Would this guy be having this conversation if Hillary Clinton was in office? And if this guy wasn't having this conversation while Hillary Clinton was in office, what does Democratic Party politics look like? What does Democratic politics look like? Is it the same status quo for the next 4 years? Or do they get the pivot? I make the point, you're not getting the pivot with Hillary Clinton in office. That's assuming that this guy is telling the truth. If this guy is telling the truth, and they are trying to do this amazing pivot back to their roots, we'll see. We'll see. Look, it's one of those things. Yes, it's nice that the DNC is saying this, but is the DNC going to be able to put muscle behind what they're saying? Meaning, when these guys are up and running, like Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Cory Booker, when all these guys are running, how are you going to get these guys to toe that particular line? How do you get them to toe that line? You think Joe Manchin, you think right-wing Joe Manchin. Look, I'm just immensely skeptical of this. I love what he said. My heart leapt. My heart leapt when it said, the truth. What is truth? That was truth. That was truth. Now, the catch becomes, what do you do with that truth? What do you do with it? And can we trust that that will be implemented? Meaning going back to the roots that were essentially saying, look, this is what the public wants. We're just going to give the public what it wants. They're not voting for us. We can't get elected. We got beat by reality shows. Our world has caved in. Fine. If this is what you want. Now, the meta-narrative for this is the wealthy donors. Meaning they still got to get funding to get elected. And even if they rewire themselves in order to get small donations, they're not going to get those small donations immediately. People still don't trust that party. Where are they getting funding from? Meaning, are they having this conversation again with their wealthy donors saying, look, we can't get elected. We got to at least give X. I find the meta-narrative fascinating because it's this conversation between the rich and the poor. Not even the poor, just the rich and everybody else. And everybody else making this balking at this point of saying, yes, this is a standard of living to which I'm willing to exist. And if you're not going to give me that particular standard of living, I'm not putting you in that office. Meaning the Democratic Party was supposed to be the party who had that responsibility of pulling this society to the left. This kind of release valve to capitalism, to the excesses of capitalism. Well, what happens when that party no longer does that? What happens when that particular party can no longer get elected? What happens when that party may be the party that's going to lose the filibuster in the next election? Do you just go to the last card of honesty and say, look, we fucked up. We fucked up. Please. Please vote for us. We're the Democratic Party. Please vote. Somebody vote for us. God damn it, please. We need votes. We'll do anything for votes. We'll even give you the platform that you want for votes. Let's see if they sell it. Let's see if they sell it. I'm curious to see how this plays out. Are these conservative blue dog Democrats really going to vote for single payer health care and free college? My heart leapt. My brain is still in my head. And I am still immensely skeptical that these guys are going to be able to pull this off. But you never know. You never know. I remain ambiguous. I like what he said, though. Definitely like what he said. Let's see him put it into practice. So. Oh, one more thing. This is kind of my point when I say scorched earth. It's like getting your will across. Well, whether you realize it or not, your vote is to some degree your will. As long as they can get that vote by hook or by crook, they don't necessarily have to do anything for you. Once they game you out your vote, they've gamed you out your vote, at least into the next term. And then they're going to try the same tactic to game you out your vote again. I'm just making this point that withholding your vote and letting those people fail gives a stronger message. Think about how much money they spend on those elections, and to lose it over and over and over and over and over again, times 900. They lost 900 something seats. That's mind-blowing. Like, to lose that much, to lose on such a massive fucking level, House, Supreme Court, presidency. Yeah, that shit is expensive. I'd imagine at some point they just said, all right, look, we can't get elected. Scorched earth. You get my vote when you represent my interests. Otherwise, you lose that $20 billion that you spent on your campaign. I'm sorry, but you weren't representing my interests, so you didn't get my vote. You lost. Is this their coming to Jesus? We'll see. We'll see. I'm skeptical. They're going to have to sell it to the other Democrats. And this guy says there's supposed to be a big announcement coming up from the Democratic leaders. So we'll see. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, rate, subscribe. You can always support the work through PayPal or Patreon. Thank you.